Keanu Reeves had always been a man of mystery, with a quiet but intense presence that spoke volumes without saying a word. But there was something people didn't know about him. A secret, a generosity that went beyond the usual acts of charity or public gestures. It was a moment, a single instant, where everything changed. He wasn't just the actor on the big screen. He was the person who understood the pain of the world and had the courage to act. It started on a rainy evening, just like any other, or so it seemed. The city streets were slick, the sound of tires sloshing through puddles drowned out by the distant hum of neon lights. Keanu was walking home, as he always did, blending into the crowd. He preferred it that way. No fans, no flashing cameras, just the world moving around him. But tonight, something felt different. There was a heaviness in the air, a sense that fate was pushing him towards something. He didn't know it yet, but a single decision would change the course of someone's life forever. He passed an alleyway when he saw a man sitting on the wet ground, clutching a crumpled jacket around him. The man looked lost, exhausted, and broken. Keanu slowed his pace. He didn't stop, at first. He kept walking, but something tugged at him. Maybe it was the way the man's eyes glanced up for just a second, as if seeking help, but unsure of how to ask. Keanu stopped. He wasn't sure why, but he couldn't walk away. There was something about this moment that felt important, more important than the busy life he was used to. As he stepped closer, he realized the man was shivering, his face pale from cold. Keanu crouched down, his voice low, almost whispering. "You okay?" he asked. The man looked at him, confused, as if he didn't believe someone like Keanu Reeves would talk to him. "I don't know," the man said, his voice breaking. "I just lost everything. My job, my family. I don't know what's next." Keanu's heart tightened, but he remained calm. This wasn't just about offering money or advice. It was something deeper. It was about truly understanding someone's pain and showing up when no one else would. Without saying a word, Keanu pulled out his phone and called a nearby shelter, arranging for the man to get help. But it didn't end there. Keanu didn't just leave after making the call. He stayed, talking to the man about life, about his struggles, about how easy it is to lose hope when everything seems to fall apart. The conversation wasn't anything grand. It was simple, real. But that was the beauty of it. Keanu didn't try to fix the man's problems. He just listened, and sometimes that's all a person needs to feel human again. By the time the shelter arrived, the man's mood had shifted. He wasn't smiling, not yet, but he was standing, ready to move forward. Keanu shook his hand and gave him a final, reassuring look. "You'll make it," he said, and then, as quickly as he appeared, Keanu disappeared into the night, blending back into the world that would never know the full extent of what happened in that alleyway. To most people, it was just another night. To the man, though, it was the night that saved him. And as for Keanu, he would never speak of it again. It wasn't about the recognition. It was about doing the right thing when no one was looking. Because to him, that was true generosity. No fanfare, no cameras, just the quiet act of kindness that had the power to change everything. And that was how Keanu Reeves, the man who seemed to have everything, taught the world the true meaning of generosity. The next morning, the city buzzed with its usual energy. Traffic, honking horns, rushing commuters, all oblivious to the quiet moment that had unfolded just hours before. But for one man, the events of the previous night lingered in his mind, almost like a dream. He couldn't shake the feeling that someone had cared for him, really cared, when the world around him had seemed cold and indifferent. Keanu's act of kindness hadn't just been about helping a stranger. It had been a reminder of something far bigger. In a world where people often feel isolated and forgotten, a simple gesture could ripple through someone's life in ways no one could predict. And that was the thing. Keanu didn't know the full impact of what he'd done. He didn't need to. As the man sat in a small coffee shop later that day, sipping his drink, he found himself reflecting on the conversation he'd had with Keanu. "You'll make it," Keanu had said. But it wasn't just the words that stayed with him. It was the way Keanu had listened, really listened, as if he understood every word without judgment. It was rare, almost impossible to find someone who would take time out of their busy life to care. The man decided to turn things around. He wasn't sure where to start, but he knew he had to try. That night he enrolled in a local job training program. The first step was always the hardest, but Keanu's simple act had given him the courage to take it. Meanwhile, Keanu went on with his day, never once considering that his actions had set off a chain reaction. He walked into a coffee shop of his own, greeted the barista with a warm smile, and sat down in his usual corner, trying to get some work done. He wasn't the type to seek recognition, but there were moments like this one where he felt a quiet satisfaction that only those who understand true human connection could understand. As Keanu sipped his coffee, his thoughts wandered. He had always been a private person, preferring to stay out of the spotlight and focus on the work that mattered to him. But in this moment, he couldn't help but wonder about the man he had helped. What would his life be like now? Had he taken that first step toward a better future? It wasn't long before Keanu's phone buzzed with a notification. It was a message from a friend in the media, asking him about a rumor that was starting to spread. Word had gotten out about Keanu's act of kindness the previous night. The story had gone viral. People were calling it Keanu Reeves' secret generosity, and the media was desperate to get his side of the story. Keanu sighed. He wasn't a fan of the attention, but he knew the truth would eventually come out. He debated for a moment, then decided to ignore the messages. He didn't want his personal life to become a spectacle. His actions had been driven by something deeper than fame. It had been about a moment of humanity, a small spark in an otherwise indifferent world, and he was content with that. But as the days went on, the story gained more traction. The media started to dig deeper, uncovering more details about Keanu's life, his struggles, his generosity, and the way he had quietly changed the lives of people around him without ever expecting anything in return. It wasn't just about helping one person in an alleyway. It was about the years of kindness, of quietly supporting causes that mattered to him, of being a voice for the voiceless. The story had become something much bigger than Keanu had ever intended. It wasn't just about him anymore. It was about the impact one person could have on the world. People began to see Keanu not just as a celebrity, but as a symbol of the change they wanted to see in the world. And in the end, that was the true power of generosity, the ability to change hearts, one quiet act at a time. Keanu Reeves may not have been seeking the spotlight, but in showing up for that one stranger, he had ignited a spark that would continue to burn brightly, reminding the world that sometimes the smallest gestures are the ones that make the biggest difference. As the story of Keanu's kindness continued to spread, something unexpected began to happen. People started to take action. The impact of one moment in time, one simple gesture, was starting to resonate with people on a global scale. The media, which had initially focused on Keanu's personal life, was now shifting its attention to the message his actions carried. News outlets, social media, even ordinary people were sharing their own stories of how they had been inspired to help others, to look out for those who might be struggling in silence. The ripple effect was undeniable. The world, it seemed, had been waiting for someone to show them that it was okay to care, that kindness still mattered in a world where it often felt like the noise of success and celebrity drowned out the quieter acts of humanity. Keanu, without even trying, had become a beacon of hope for so many people. But it wasn't about the fame for him. It never was. One evening, a few weeks after the incident, Keanu was invited to a charity event for a cause he deeply cared about: mental health awareness. He had been a quiet supporter of mental health initiatives for years, but he had always kept his involvement low-key. He didn't want people to focus on him. He wanted them to focus on the cause. But this time, he found himself walking into a crowded hall, surrounded by people who had seen his story, heard about his actions, and were eager to meet the man who had unwittingly become a symbol of kindness. As he entered the venue, his eyes were drawn to a woman sitting by herself at a table. She was in her mid-30s, with tired eyes that seemed to carry the weight of years of hardship. Keanu recognized that look immediately. It was the same look he had seen in the eyes of the man he had helped in the alleyway weeks earlier. Without thinking, he made his way over to her, his footsteps quiet, almost hesitant. "Mind if I join you?" Keanu asked, his voice soft, the same gentle tone he had used that night on the streets. The woman looked up, startled, then blinked twice as if unsure she was seeing things clearly. "Keanu Reeves?" she whispered, her voice shaking. Keanu smiled, but it wasn't the usual movie star grin. It was a smile that conveyed understanding, empathy, as if he had known her pain long before they'd ever met.
"I'm Keanu. Mind if I sit?" he asked again, his eyes locking with hers. She nodded, almost as if she was still processing the fact that someone she admired, someone she thought was untouchable, was sitting across from her in this quiet moment. They exchanged pleasantries, but Keanu quickly noticed that she was hesitant to talk about herself. He didn't push. Instead, he simply listened as she shared her story, her struggles with loneliness and the overwhelming weight of living in a world that seemed indifferent to her pain. The conversation drifted into deeper waters, into the heart of what had brought her to this event in the first place, her desire to make a difference, to find purpose in a world that had often shown her its darkest sides. Keanu didn't offer solutions. He didn't make promises. He simply listened, offering words of encouragement, of quiet support. "You don't need to have all the answers," Keanu said, his voice calm. "Sometimes it's enough just to keep going, to keep showing up for the people who need you. Even if you don't always see the impact, it's there. You make a difference every single day." The woman sat quietly for a moment, processing his words, and then a small smile tugged at her lips, a smile that hadn't been there when they first met. It was a small thing, but in that moment, it meant everything. Keanu had helped her see a glimpse of hope again, just like he had done for so many others before her. As the event went on, Keanu remained at the sidelines, still unnoticed by most, lost in his thoughts. He wasn't interested in the spotlight. He wasn't interested in the accolades. He was interested in what was happening in the small moments, the quiet moments where real change began. And as the night came to a close, he knew that his own life had been transformed too, not by the fame, not by the stories, but by the quiet, powerful realization that kindness could change the world in ways no one expected. As he left the venue, he thought about the people he had met, the lives he had touched, and how something as simple as a moment of empathy could carry so much weight. He was just one man, but the impact of his generosity, his secret generosity, had already begun to spark something far bigger than he could ever have imagined. And in the end, that was all that mattered. The weeks that followed Keanu's simple yet profound acts of kindness had transformed him into something more than just a beloved actor. The media frenzy had died down, but the impact of what had transpired was far from over. People all around the world were still talking about the man who had shown that even the smallest gestures could have the largest ripple effects. His story had become a global movement, a movement of kindness, empathy, and selfless generosity. Yet Keanu remained as humble as ever. He continued with his life, doing the things he loved, staying out of the spotlight as much as possible. He never spoke publicly about the night in the alleyway. He didn't need to. For him, the value of his actions lay not in recognition, but in knowing that he had done something that mattered. But as time passed, Keanu found himself facing a new reality. one where the world was paying closer attention to what he did and didn't do. The impact of his kindness had made him a symbol for people in need of hope. In a world that often felt divided and chaotic, he had become a quiet leader, someone people looked up to for guidance, even if he never asked for that role. One late afternoon, while walking through a quiet park, Keanu noticed a group of young people sitting on a bench. They were talking animatedly, gesturing with their hands as they discussed something passionately. Keanu had long learned to avoid drawing attention to himself, but as he walked past, he overheard a word that caught his ear. His name. "Keanu Reeves," one of the young men was saying, shaking his head. "He's not like other celebrities. He's different. He actually does something. He doesn't just talk about change. He acts." The words stopped Keanu in his tracks. He hadn't been expecting to hear his name, and certainly not in this context. The idea that people were paying attention to him in this way was humbling, yet it stirred something inside him. People weren't just seeing him as the actor or the Hollywood star. They were seeing him for the man he truly was, someone who cared, and that was more powerful than any script or role he could ever take on. As the evening sun began to set, casting a golden hue over the park, Keanu continued walking, lost in his thoughts. He was still processing the enormity of what had happened since that night in the alley. The ripple effect of his actions had spread further than he could have imagined. He hadn't done it for recognition, but somehow that recognition had come anyway. And now it seemed like his every move was being watched, as if the world was waiting for him to do more. That night, Keanu sat alone in his apartment, reflecting on everything that had transpired. His phone buzzed once, twice, a message from an old friend, someone he hadn't spoken to in years. "Keanu, I've been following your story. I just wanted to say thank you for showing us that real change comes from within. You've made a difference, not just in the world, but in my life." Keanu smiled softly, reading the message. He wasn't sure how to respond. It was humbling, but it was also a reminder of the responsibility that came with his actions. He wasn't just Keanu Reeves anymore. He was a symbol. He spent the next few days in contemplation, thinking about how he could continue to make an impact. How could he use the attention he was now receiving to drive real change? The world needed more than just stories of kindness. It needed action. In the weeks that followed, Keanu began quietly supporting several causes close to his heart, especially those focused on mental health and homelessness. He didn't announce these efforts. He didn't make public appearances or hold press conferences. Instead, he focused on the people who were on the fringes of society, the ones who didn't have a voice, the ones who had been left behind. He worked with organizations to ensure that those struggling with mental health issues had access to the care they needed. He quietly donated to shelters, not for the sake of attention, but because he believed in the cause. His generosity continued, not because he wanted to be recognized, but because he understood the value of giving without expecting anything in return. One day, while volunteering at a shelter, Keanu came across a young woman sitting alone in a corner, her eyes downcast, lost in her thoughts. Keanu approached her, offering a simple smile. "How's it going?" he asked gently. The woman looked up, her eyes wide in disbelief. Are you Keanu Reeves?" she stammered. Keanu nodded. "I'm just here to help. I know what it's like to feel like no one's listening, but I'm here." For a few moments they didn't talk. Keanu simply sat next to her, offering his silent support. It wasn't about making a grand gesture or giving a speech. It was about being present, showing someone that they mattered, that their struggles were real. And in that quiet moment, Keanu knew that his mission was far from over. The impact of his secret generosity would continue to spread, not through headlines, but through real, tangible change. The world may never fully understand why he did what he did, but Keanu didn't need them to. He had found his purpose, not in the fame, not in the accolades, but in the small moments of connection that, one by one, could heal the world. And so, Keanu Reeves continued his journey, one act of kindness at a time, leaving behind a legacy that was far greater than any role he had ever played. It was a legacy of love, of humanity, and of the belief that, in a world that often seemed broken, the smallest gestures could make all the difference. Months passed, and the world had started to move on. The story of Keanu's kindness had become a distant memory for many, a fleeting moment in the whirlwind of media cycles and celebrity gossip. But for those whose lives he had touched, whether directly or indirectly, the impact was still very much alive. Keanu, ever the quiet soul, had continued his path of giving without expecting anything in return. His name had become synonymous with something more profound than his work in Hollywood. It was now associated with a deep, unwavering humanity. He never sought recognition, and perhaps that was the greatest testament to his generosity. The world had begun to shift, slowly but surely, as more and more people embraced the idea that one person, through small but consistent acts of kindness, could change lives. One evening, while walking through a crowded street, Keanu received a text message that made him pause. It was from the woman he had met at the shelter months ago, the one he had shared a quiet moment with. "Keanu, I just wanted to let you know, I'm doing better. I've started working with a non-profit to help others who feel lost. I can't thank you enough for that day. You gave me hope when I had none." Keanu's heart warmed as he read the message. He hadn't expected any recognition. The woman had never asked for anything more than a moment of his time, but her message was a powerful reminder of why he did what he did. He had been a small part of her journey, but that small act had triggered something much larger, an entire chain of events that would continue to impact others for years to come. He put his phone down, looking around at the world moving on around him, but for a brief moment he felt a sense of peace. The world didn't always have to be loud or fast. Sometimes the most important changes happened in the quietest, most personal moments. Keanu knew that he had played a part in something greater than himself. As he continued walking, he noticed a small boy standing by the sidewalk, watching him with wide eyes. The boy didn't ask for an autograph or shout his name. Instead, he simply said, "Thank you for being kind. I want to be like you when I grow up." Keanu stopped, crouched down to the boy's level and smiled. He didn't say much, just a quiet, sincere smile. "You don't have to be like me," he said softly. "Just be the best version of yourself. Kindness is all you need." The boy smiled, and for a moment time seemed to stand still. It was in moments like this that Keanu realized the true power of what he had started. It wasn't about the fame, the stories, or even the recognition. It was about inspiring others to be better, to be kinder, to make the world a little less lonely, one small act at a time. Keanu Reeves had become more than just a symbol of Hollywood. He had become a symbol of the quiet revolution, a revolution of kindness that lived in every small, unnoticed act. The story of his secret generosity was far from over. It would continue to unfold in ways no one could predict, in the lives of countless people who would be touched by his simple, powerful belief in humanity. And so, as Keanu walked into the horizon, a quiet figure amidst the bustle of life, he knew his true purpose had always been simple: to remind the world that in a world that often feels dark, one person's light could shine brighter than anything else.